Houston. Houston, we have a problem. DJ Apollo has landed. I repeat, DJ Apollo has landed.
You are listening to the Tales of Music and Film podcast, and I am your host, Christian Taylor. And I want to start by saying thank you for clicking on today's episode. In this recording, we are going to wrap up the Indiana Jones franchise by covering the movie that started one of the most famous franchises in Hollywood history. Now, I've said this time and time again, but Indiana Jones is my favorite male lead character of all time, and this movie is the one that started the whole journey. Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it's a perfect movie. I really mean this. I don't use the term perfect movie very lightly. There's only about, I would say, around 10-ish movies that I would consider perfect movies. Some of those films include Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, Jaws, Blade Runner 2049, just to name a couple, but there are only a few films out there, in my opinion, that I consider perfect, and Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of them. This movie is a action-adventure masterpiece. I cannot say that enough. And if you remember in my previous recordings, when I covered Last Crusade and Temple of Doom, in the notes that I found, Spielberg and George Lucas were really wanting to make, a James Bond-ish kind of story. And I would definitely have to start by saying that Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, in my opinion, I feel like this movie is the most James Bond-ish one out of the 5 films, in my opinion. I mean, I think some people would argue Temple of Doom might be more James Bond-ish, but we didn't get to see Indy being a teacher again in Temple of Doom, so I really do feel like in Raiders' case that I think if we're comparing it to a James Bond movie, I think Raiders was the most James Bond one out of the 5 movies. And as I mentioned before, I watched Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark on VHS for the first time. My amazing grandmother, Rhonda House, she is one of the greatest people I've ever met in my life. She owns the Indiana Jones trilogy on VHS, and she let me borrow them when I was a very little kid, when I was around, I would say, 6 or 7 years old. And when I watched Raiders for the very first time, I was hooked. I was hooked, man. Like, I watched Raiders, Temple of Doom, and Crusade on repeat every day for many years. And I was obsessed with these movies. Like, my entire childhood, like I've said time and time again, my entire childhood is wrapped around these Indiana Jones movies. And the thing that I really remember most from those VHS tapes are the old commercials that you would see. On the Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Temple of Doom tapes, there was a commercial for the Young Indiana Jones TV show that aired back in the early 90s. I think it only ran for like 3 seasons before it was canceled. But that commercial is what I remember most. Like, it was pretty cool to see. And I remember Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade on that VHS tape. There was a Diet Coke commercial where this lady she was with her boyfriend watching Raiders on the TV, and her boyfriend's like, "Can you give me a drink, please?" So she goes into the kitchen, and all these traps start coming out of the walls and everything, like the jungle starts taking over the kitchen, and Indy keeps jumping in to save her, and she gets to her refrigerator and grabs the one Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi in the refrigerator like it's an artifact, and Indy swings her back to the kitchen entrance, and and she just walks back in and hands her boyfriend the Diet Pepsi. Like, dude, it's one of the greatest commercials I've ever seen in my life. Like, why don't they market stuff like that anymore? Like, that whole commercial, like, I hate diet sodas with a passion. But after seeing that commercial, I will gladly drink a Diet Pepsi. You know? Because, dude, I love that commercial. Like, dude, seriously. If you guys are interested, you should definitely go back and, like, look up old commercials from, like, the 80s and 90s. They're absolutely hilarious. Like, another good one I watched once was this, it was a Jack in the Box commercial where, so Jack in the Box, like, their food chain logo is a guy in a suit wearing this giant, like, white dummy head with a little, like a party hat on top of it. And in this commercial, it came out in 1996. I just randomly found it on YouTube, and I was laughing my butt off. So what happens is, he drives over to this guy's house who's been talking crap about Jack in the Box. He knocks on the door, and the Jack in the Box mascot's like, I heard you were talking bad stuff about my company. I take this personally. And the dude's like, will you get off my property? And he's like, sure, just eat my food right quick and say it's good, and I'll be on my way. And the dude's like, no. Then the Jack in the Box guy literally breaks into the dude's house and tackles him in the backyard and forces him to eat a Jack in the Box cheeseburger. And he's like, oh my gosh, this is actually really good. Like, I am so sorry. I retract everything I say. Like, it's so hilarious. It's just like, dude, they need to bring back, like, that level of, like, commercial. Like, that 30-second commercial, it was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. Like, I will gladly go eat Jack in the Box. So that was just another example. Like, dude, the late 20th century commercials were just so hilarious. They're just so good. But, yeah, the Indiana Jones VHS tapes, like, the commercials are, like, forever are branded in my brain. And this was honestly, in my opinion, Race of the Lost Ark is the movie that I think really kick-started Harrison Ford's career. Now, I know that some people might say that, oh, actually, no, Christian, it was Star Wars, but yeah, I mean, like, by this time era, he would have already started, you know, Star Wars New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. But I really do think that Raiders of the Lost Ark was, like, the movie that really kickstarted his career. Because, I mean, after this movie, literally the following year, he starred in Blade Runner. Then he was in the movie Witness, which came out in 1985, where he got his first Academy Award nomination. Then his career really started off from that point. So I think that Raiders was, like, the moment that made Harrison Ford an action movie star for life. So, as I like to do with these reviews, I would like to take a moment and read a quick little summary about the plot of Raiders of the Lost Ark. So, in this epic tale, in which a very famous archaeologist tries to beat a band of Nazis to a unique religious relic that is central to their plans for world domination, battling against a scared and vengeful ex-girlfriend, Indiana Jones is in constant peril, making narrow escapes at every turn in this celebration of the innocent adventure movies of an earlier era. Now, that is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, that little summary does not do the film justice by any means. Raiders of the Lost Ark has everything you could ever ask for when watching an action-adventure film. This film, it has it all. It's the complete adventure film package in the best possible way. So, Raiders of the Lost Ark was released on June 12th, 1981. And the director, Steven Spielberg, we all know and love him. He's one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, in my opinion. The story was written by George Lucas and Philip Kaufman, and of course, its sequels are Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, and then 18 years later, we got Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Then, another 15 years later, we got Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. The movie was distributed by Paramount Pictures and Paramount Home Entertainment. Now, here is the real kicker for you. So, you would think that this movie had a huge budget, right? Not necessarily. Like, this is an insane... So, listen to this. The budget for Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, $20 million. That's it. Meanwhile, you have Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny having a budget of $300 million, and that movie just barely did enough to get its money back. And meanwhile, Raiders of the Lost Ark, $20 million budget, and its box office was $389.9 million. This was 1981's biggest grossing film by a wide margin. Like, dude, the original, like, the four films that Spielberg directed, right, all made millions of dollars. Now, look, I like Dial of Destiny. I thought it was a good installment, but there is part of me that kind of wishes it hadn't have been made, because Crystal Skull really was, in my opinion, the ending for the Indiana Jones story. Like, 5 was really good and all, but recently I'm starting to get into the mindset, just kind of like, did we really need this movie, you know? And I covered the movie on the podcast if you want to listen to it, but I love the movie a lot, I really do, but I just personally think that the film was very unnecessary, and it just kind of felt like a cash grab, and Disney did not have any cash to grab. Like, the movie bombed. Like, I looked at data, like, last year or something, and I think the movie, like, overall just made barely enough, you know, to get its money back, but it was not a hit at all. And Disney, one of their biggest mistakes was that they were trying to pander to the nostalgic audience, you know, and Disney seems to think that the key to making a good movie is having these insane budgets, but no, that's not the case at all. If you have a good story and a good film made, it should make money all on its own. You shouldn't be having these insane budgets. Like, Disney, like, someday, right, I would love to do a recording just going through, like, what Disney is doing to themselves. Like, they are digging themselves into like, they are digging their own grave at this point. The company is going down in flames, like, super fast. Every year, their movies just keep getting worse. And they keep trying to pander to certain audiences, and meanwhile, they're trying to nostalgia bait all the old school fans into coming to see their films because they keep trying to revive all these franchises that should have been left alone. But Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark shows you that if you make an epic movie, you shouldn't have to worry about making money. If you make a good film, audiences will want to come see it, and you will make a good amount of money. You don't need huge budgets to make a good movie, and I wish that Disney would learn that lesson, but I highly doubt they ever will. So, let's talk about something more positive, shall we? So, the cast for this movie, we have Harrison Ford, Carrie Allen, Paul Freeman, Alfred Molina, Frank Marshall, John Rhys Davies, and Denholm Elliott. And this movie, man, I'm telling you, the cast, just chef's kiss perfection. Everybody who was cast in this movie brought their A game. And I want to say, if I pronounced any of the names wrong, I do apologize. I'm not exactly the best at getting names right sometimes, so if I said a name wrong, I apologize. But, why? So now I want to get into my notes here. First, I'll just by saying, why do I love this movie so much? It's just the adventure aspect is just done so well. Like with these movies, you feel like you're witnessing like this epic quest with each one, and you really feel that in Raiders. Like, it's amazing. And the whole, like, I want to dedicate this next section right quick, right? I just want to talk about the opening, like, the first, like, 20 minutes of this movie. Like, the opening, like, sequence of this movie, it can be its own film. Like, when we see Indy walk up, right, as soon as the credits are rolling, and you see him and his gang of other helpers, I guess, they're walking through the South Africa jungle, and you have John Williams' epic, score playing, and, you see this guy wearing this fedora, his face is, like, kind of hidden, wearing like this this brown leather jacket, and everything, and and my favorite moment in the whole sequence is where they stop by the lake, right? And Indy gets the map out. He's looking it over. Then one of the guys tries to pull a fast one, pulls a gun on him. Then you just see Indy take the whip and whips the gun out of the guy's hand. He runs off, and then Indy emerges from the shadows, and we see his face. And then the music takes this turn of like, holy cow, this guy's a badass. Just the minute we see Harrison emerge from the shadows and we see him in all his glory with that smirk, it's just, oh, dude, one of the greatest introductions to a character ever. In that one moment, we learn right away, this is a guy you don't mess with. Oh my gosh, man. It is cinema gold, man. I cannot say it enough. It's just, so good. Like, just talking about this makes me want to go watch the movie, right now. And, some of my favorites, so, that whole opening sequence, and then we have, Indy and, Alfred Molina's character, they get to the temple where the artifact is, and they go inside, right? And then we get the epic sequence of Indy trying to sneak around the floor because there are pressure plates that you can step on that'll make arrows shoot out of the walls, and he's having to like tiptoe around it, right, to get to the golden head at the end of the hallway. And then he tries to take the artifact off and replace it with a bag of sand, trying to get the weight right, but unfortunately Indy didn't get the weight right. So the whole temple starts falling apart, and then Indy grabs the head, starts running down the hallway. Then Alfred Molina's character betrays them at the last minute, grabs the artifact and runs away, and leaves Indy, dangling over the edge of a hole, and Indy's trying to pull himself up. Meanwhile, the trap door is closed, and it's going to trap him inside the temple. And Indy just barely grabs, one of the vines and pulls himself back up and just barely gets under the door and gets away. And Alfred Molina's character gets killed. Indy grabs the artifact, keeps running down the hallway further, and then what do we get? One of the most, parodied sequences in movie history, like the boulder sequence. Like, the boulder sequence has been parodied and so many other movies. Like, I remember in Mythbusters, they did this cool thing where they built the whole boulder out of Lego bricks, and they wanted to see how far it could roll down a hill before it started breaking apart. So the boulder starts going down, and it chases Indy down the rest of the hallway, and Indy just barely makes it out of the temple, and you think he's escaped, right? His troubles are over with? Nope. Guess who's waiting for him? His rivalry, Belloc, with all the natives, and they're all aiming bow and arrows at Indy. So Indy has no choice but to give Belloc the artifact. Indy runs off, and then we get the other famous scene of Indy's pilot Jog starting out the plane to get the heck out of there. Indy runs through the jungle, grabs a vine, swings and lands in the lake, swims on the plane. Meanwhile, we have John Williams' score amping this scene up to it goes from 1 to 11 instantly. Indy grabs the plane and gets in while it's taking off, and he just narrowly escapes. That whole opening sequence is breathtaking, one of the greatest introductions to a character ever made. Now, my favorite scenes in this, so I have to say that picking my absolute favorite scenes from this movie was really hard to do. Like, there are so many amazing scenes in this film. The whole movie is my favorite, trying to pick out particular scenes that I really enjoyed, dude, it was not an easy task by any means. But I carefully picked out a few that I absolutely enjoyed. So one of my first ones that I want to talk about is the Army intelligence scene where we have the two men from the Army Intelligence meet up with Indy and Marcus in the college library to discuss the Nazi transmissions that they intercepted. And it's revealed to Indy that the Nazis are digging where the city of Tanis used to be. Now, what is the significance to the city of Tanis? And Indy explains that Tanis is said to be one of the possible last resting places of the Lost Ark. And it was the chest that the Hebrews used to carry around the Ten Commandments. Now, I am an atheist. I'm not a religious person by any means. I don't know anything about religion that much. But the religious aspect, it does help this movie a lot. But I don't know if the lore is in fact correct. I don't know if what Indy is telling the Army Intelligence guys is true about, the Ten Commandments and the Ark. I don't know the story, so I can't say for certain, if what he's saying is actually true. But nevertheless, Indy, this scene with the Army Intelligence is so well because it demonstrates that Indy knows history. He loves getting to talk about it. When he goes over to the chalkboard and starts drawing the staff and the artifact that you need, it's a medallion with a brown crystal in the middle, and you would attach it to the top of the pole, and there's a hidden room where Tanis used to be that had a replica of the city on the floor. And what you would do was you would put the staff in a certain spot at a certain time of day. The sun would shine through the artifact, through the jewel, and it would make a beam shoot down the floor, pinpointing the exact location of the Well of Souls, the actual tomb where the Ark is said to be. And this whole sequence just shows you how much Indy loves history, and it just shows you how smart he is. He knows his stuff. He has researched this for who knows how many years. And he is amazing. And the scene also demonstrates, the mystery of the Ark. How cool it sounds and how mysterious it is. Could this Ark artifact actually hold actual, power? It's really cool. So yeah, that whole sequence was done extremely well. And it did a couple of important jobs. One, showing Indy's intelligence and how much he loves history. Number two, showing the mysterious, how mysterious and ancient the Ark of the Covenant is. And the next scene that I want to briefly talk about right quick is the meeting with Marion Ravenwood. Now, Marion, she's a babe, man. I gotta say that right now. Marion, she is one of the greatest female leads in Hollywood history. This movie came out, 2 years after the first Alien film came out with Sigourney Weaver. And Sigourney Weaver, she was one of the very first, in my opinion, female action movie stars, and she broke the mold. And then, just a couple years later, who follows in her footsteps? Karen Allen, who she was amazing as Marion Ravenwood. Dude, all the men listening to this recording right now, raise hands if you had a huge crush on her when you were a kid. I did. Dude, Marion is gorgeous, man. Even to this day, I have a huge crush on Marion Ravenwood. She's amazing, dude. She's amazing. But yeah, Marion Ravenwood, she is a freaking amazing character. And Karen was the perfect choice. She was incredible in this movie. And what I love about this sequence is that Indy and Marion know each other. And that was a big thing for me. I'm so happy that with this movie, they didn't do the James Bond aspect of Bond just hooking up with these random girls that he's never met before, Now, the James Bond movies, I've only seen the 4 movies with Pierce Brosnan, and I've seen the first 3 movies that Daniel Craig did. I still haven't seen the last 2 yet, I need to get around to doing that at some point. But anyway, I've only seen, Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig. But the one thing I didn't really like about, like especially the Pierce Brosnan ones, was that he hooks, like, Bond in the Pierce Brosnan's portrayal of James Bond. He hooks up with multiple different women in all 4 of his movies, and that always drove me crazy. Like, I think it's a lot better when you have history with a woman, like you know her, That's why I think the relationship between Indy and Marion was so good, is that they've known each other, like, before. So I was really happy that they decided to have them have history first, 'cause I think that's better. But you get the sense of, like, oh man, these two have history. Like, the thing that I love about this, what's the first thing that Marion does, like, after she says, her classic line, Indiana Jones, I always knew you'd come walking back through my door. And I love that moment where she knows it's him because she sees his shadow on the wall with the fedora on. Oh, dude, that shot of Indy's image, reflection on the wall from the lighting, it is so good. And what's one of the first things she does? She socks him right in the face. It's just like, yeah, you're not getting any hugs or kisses from me, just a straight up punch to the face. And you find out through the dialogue that she's an old flame of Indy from a decade ago, and things didn't exactly go well, when Indy cut ties with her, and she just, like, unleashed all of her anger on him with that one punch. And and the whole thing and them catching up, it was just so beautifully done, and it just kind of shows you that these two left on extremely bad terms. And then the scene that follows is the whole gun sequence, where some of the Nazis show up, because the reason why Indy met up with Marion in the first place is that her dad, Avner Ravenwood, was an archaeologist, and he was actually the one who trained Indy to be like how he is now. And Avner collected the artifact that I mentioned earlier that Indy needs to attach to a staff so that it will show him where the Ark is, and Marion has it, but she says that she will give it to Indy tomorrow. And Indy's like, I'll pay you $3,000 if you give me the artifact. And Marion's like, okay, deal. I'll give it to you tomorrow. Indy leaves, and then the Nazis show up right after he leaves. And let's just say these Nazis were not, negotiation was never on their minds at all. They were just going to, they were forcing Marion, oh yeah, by the way, you either give us the artifact or we are going to kill you. So the Nazis grab Marion, the head Nazi wearing the black suit and hat, who is a very nasty man, by the way. He grabs the fire poker, and he's getting ready to burn Marion with it. Indy whips it out of his hand. Indy comes in with a gun, and then a whole gunfight breaks out, and it's beautifully done. It's like, with the action sequences in the Indiana Jones films, they never necessarily feel like they're over the top. I mean, I would argue that the tank sequence in Last Crusade was pretty out there in some ways, but it was still amazing to watch. But I think the gunfight scene in Raiders at Marion's bar, I think it was probably the most realistic gunfight that we got out of the 5 movies, in my opinion. Like, Indy, he's not necessarily the best shot. I mean, he kills a couple of them, but, he's not, like, hitting them instantly. It's a more realistic fight, in my opinion. Constantly ducking for cover, just randomly, shooting until you hit someone. And I feel like in real life, you're not going to have necessarily time to stop and aim for a target, because it's all extremely, fast-paced and everything. But nonetheless, the whole gun scene's amazing. And, and the other thing that I love about this sequence is that Marion is not some damsel in distress who needs saving. Like, Marion handles herself the entire film. And I love when the last bad guy left standing has a gun pointed at Indy, Marion shoots and kills him from behind. And that was the moment showing, yeah, I'm not a damsel. I can handle myself. You know, I'm Indy's equal, you know? But yeah, that whole gun sequence was just amazing to watch. And another scene that I really enjoyed was Indy finding the Ark of the Covenant. The entire sequence where Indy and his trusted close friend Sala. Now Sala is a bro, man. I gotta say that. Sala is Indy's like right-hand man. Like Sala has Indy's back in all 3 movies that he was in. So Sala's in Raiders, Last Crusade, and Dial of Destiny. And Sala is just like, he is like the most amazing friend to Indy. Like, Sala's a bro. He always has Indy's back. Like, Sala, you are an awesome character, man. So, Indy and Sala sneak onto the Nazi dig site, and they find the tomb where the mini city is located, and Indy sneaks down there with a staff, and we get the Ark of the Covenant theme. And, oh, dude, John Williams, the way he composed this, like, oh my gosh, it's so good. I can't talk about it. Like, talking about it doesn't do it justice. You have to watch this sequence for yourself. When Indy gets into that tomb, and after looking around, he finally finds the right hole to put the staff into. And then a beam of light shines through the relic, and it shoots down on the floor, and the music just kicks in, right? And it's just so amazing. It just, oh my gosh, it's just so epic. Like, what else can you say? And then it shoots down, showing Indy the exact spot where the artifact is. Oh, it's just so freaking cool. Then, the scene that follows is Indy leading a group of workers up to the exact spot where the Well of Souls is. Then they start digging. And then we get one of my most favorite scenes in the film. The sun's setting, and all you see are the outlines of all the men digging. And we see Indy standing there in the sunlight with his hat on, just walking back and forth while the workers are singing this song. It may not seem like much, but the cinematography on that shot, I could literally, that can be a painting framed on a wall in a museum somewhere. It's so beautifully done. The contrast, the colors, it's just so breathtaking to see. And then, you know, right after this, the whole sequence of Indy and Sala going down by rope into the Well of Souls to get the Ark. And keep in mind, the entire thing is filled with snakes everywhere. And Indy does not like snakes at all. Because remember, back in the opening sequence, I forgot to mention, when Indy gets back in the plane while it's taking off, there is a giant snake in Indy's seat. And that was when Jock was like, oh, that's just my pet snake Richie. And Indy yells, I hate snakes, Jock, I hate them. So we learn, you know, right away, Indy does not like snakes at all. So what they did was they threw torches down into the tomb, and Indy brought down a thing of gas with them and sprayed it on the snakes and set them on fire to make a path to get to where the Ark is. And, dude, the moment when Sala and Indy raised the Ark out of its, like, stone it was put into, when it comes out glowing, it's just, holy cow, man. I think the Ark of the Covenant might be one of my favorite, like, props, like, ever made. It just looks so cool. The amount of work that must have went into making it, like, the detail on it is just so beautiful, you know? The craftsmanship and everything, like, it's so cool. And, you know, they bring it back, they put it in a box, it gets brought back up, and of course, guess who's waiting to steal all of the glory yet again? Belloc. This is what he does best. He lets Indy do all the hard work, then he just swoops in at the last minute and takes it all from him. Just like that. You know, Indy does all the hard work, and Belloc gets the fame and glory. So Indy and Marion end up getting trapped in the tomb, and then they have to find a way to escape. And then what follows is them finally breaking out of the tomb, and then they find out that the Nazis are planning on, flying the Ark off-site on one of their planes. So Indy has this idea of trying to take the plane over and fly it out of there with the Ark, and but that whole plan goes south very quickly when Indy gets into a fist fight with one of the Nazi workers, and then this giant muscle guy Nazi comes walking out of a hut, right? And he notices the fight, and he's like, dude, I gotta get in on this. So he walks over, he's like, hey you, come here. So then Indy and him start fighting, and it's just like Indy doesn't stand a chance. Like, this guy is like the freaking Hulk, and he's just wiping the floor with Indy. And the whole fight scene's pretty fun to watch, because you can tell Indy's giving it all he has, and he just doesn't stand a chance. The guy is taller and stronger than him in every way. And the fight goes on for a while, and I love this little moment where Marion gets inside the cockpit of the plane, and she sees a truck of Nazis heading toward Indy, and she just grabs the mounted machine gun on the plane, and then she just mows all the Nazis down like freaking Rambo. It's just, it's just like, Marion, what else can you do to make me love you at this point? It's just like, dude. Marion is the prime example of a female lead being written in the best way imaginable. Like, watching her kick ass on her own, it's amazing to see. I'm here for it. And then Indy finally beats the big guy by... The big guy doesn't notice that the plane is moving and the propellers are spinning. And Indy ducks, and then we don't see it, but the guy literally gets ripped to shreds by the blades, and we just see blood splatter on the plane. That's the one thing about the Indiana Jones movies. It's just like, in every movie, the villains in this franchise, they get like some of the most like horrific deaths I've ever seen. And the one thing I don't understand is, how in the heck did these movies get PG ratings? Like, the Indiana Jones trilogy, I'm pretty sure the main 3 movies all had a PG rating. And it is insane. The things that these movies get away with, I'm like, how the heck did these movies not get a PG-13 rating? I don't understand. Like, if you think that that guy getting cut up by the blades was bad, we haven't even gotten to the ending yet. And I'll get to that here in a minute. But first, the next scene that I like about this movie is the whole truck sequence. Holy cow, man. Where do you start? So after the plane plan didn't work out, the Nazis decide to escort the Ark on a military truck with jeeps with machine guns attached, and like, they're making sure like this escort has a lot of protection so nobody tries to steal the Ark from the Nazis. So they tried driving it off-site. Indy follows on horseback, and this whole sequence is action movie gold, man. It's everything you want. Like, Indy comes riding down a hill, rides on the road. Then we get this epic stunt of Indy jumping off the horse onto the truck, and he climbs up to the cab, pulls one of the Nazis out, jumps in, and then starts fighting the other Nazi, and then Indy finally gets the wheel of the truck. Then he starts, ramming the jeeps and other vehicles off the road, and we get another horrendous death sequence where a military jeep, like Nazi jeep, comes driving up on the left, and Indy drives the truck. He turns it to the right and whacks the jeep, and the jeep of Nazis go off a cliff, and we just watch the Nazis fall endlessly to their deaths. Like, it's horrifying. And then the Nazis that are in the back of the truck with the Ark start climbing to the side, trying to, get to Indy and kill him. But Indy sees the Nazis on the side of the truck with the truck's rearview mirrors. So Indy tries driving the truck left and right, trying to swing and get the Nazis off the vehicle. He manages to get most of them to fall off, but one Nazi makes it to the cab and manages to shoot Indy in the arm. And that was when the music takes a drastic change. Like, Indy is now losing. Like, this whole moment of Indy getting shot shows you, like, yeah, by the way, people, our hero is not immortal. He's human. He can get hurt and shot. And he just did get shot. And he gets shot, and another Nazi comes in and throws Indy through the windshield, right? And he's literally hanging off the truck from the front. And then we get another epic stunt of Indy having to crawl underneath the truck while it's going full speed, right? And he manages to attach his whip to the bottom of the truck. Then Indy gets dragged, through the road from the truck, and he manages to climb back on, gets back to the cab, and beats the absolute crap out of that Nazi. And then he throws him over the front of the truck, and then Indy runs him over. Another pretty horrific death moment. But Indy finally gets the Ark and makes it back to Cairo with the help of some of the people. He drives the truck into like this little building, and then some of the villagers drive their carts and stuff in front of it to camouflage it. Just that whole truck sequence is one of the greatest action pieces I've ever seen. And there's nothing negative. Dude, this whole movie, there is nothing negative that I can say about it. It's just, oh my gosh, it's just pure epicness. The whole 2-hour runtime, not one negative thing in this movie. Nothing. It's all breathtaking to watch. And then we get to the death scene where the Nazis get the Ark back from Indy again after he tried escaping Cairo on a ship. And the Nazis take the Ark to this island, and Belloc wants to open the Ark up to see if the artifacts if the pieces of the Ten Commandments or something are inside of it. And they have Indy and Marion tied up on a pole to watch the, quote, ritual happen. So Belloc and the two head Nazis are opening up the Ark, and it's just full of sand. And you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Turns out the sand is the Ten Commandments. They've been turned to sand, I believe. And then all these ghosts start coming out of the Ark, and then this giant light comes in out of nowhere and starts killing all the Nazis. And like the light, it literally melts all the Nazis from the inside. It is horrific. Again, how the hell did this movie get a PG rating? And we hadn't even gotten to the worst part yet. The death scene for Belloc and the other two head Nazis in the movie, they're like the trio villains of this movie. Like, Belloc's head literally blows up. The other head Nazi that I mentioned earlier, the one who wears the black suit, he literally melts, like his face melts. And the other guy, the other military head Nazi, his head literally shrinks and his eyes like gouge out. Again, how is this PG? If this movie came out today, I'm pretty sure it would get an R rating just off of that scene alone. It is horrific. It's insane. Like, this is like one of the... I think this is the most horrific death sequence in the entire franchise. I don't think anything else comes close. I mean, Donathan's death in Last Crusade was pretty horrific, but what happens to Belloc and the others in Raiders? Holy cow, it is horrific. But yeah, all the Nazis die, and Indy and Marion don't die because they don't look at it. They kept their eyes shut throughout the entire time. And the fire and everything that came out of the Ark, it burned their ropes. So now they're free. And they make it back to the United States. And the Army intelligence basically screwed over Indy. Because the deal was that he would bring the Ark back and that Indy would be allowed to take it to the museum for everybody to see, right? Nope. The Army intelligence pulled a fast one on Indy and said, sorry, it now belongs to us. And we get that last shot of Indy, walking out of the building in Washington, just completely angry, but, Marion cheers him up, and he's like, hey, you want to go for a drink? And he's like, yeah, let's go do it. Because for me, I think the real treasure that Indy found during this whole movie was Marion Ravenwood, reigniting his love, and relationship with her. Like, she was the real treasure, in my opinion. It's like, guys, I'm telling you right now, like, when you find, your true love, like, he or she, hold on to that person. Like, if you have a healthy, beautiful relationship with your significant other, you're rich. Like, that is the greatest treasure you'll ever find in life, in my opinion, is true love. It's the most valuable thing. No amount of money comes close to that. Like, true love, man, that's worth more than any amount of money, ever. But I love that last shot of Indy and Marion walking off to have some fun. Like, she was the real treasure of the movie. And then we get that ominous final shot of the Ark getting locked away in this military hangar. And we get that last shot of the millions of boxes of other artifacts that the Army intelligence has locked away. And then the credits start rolling and we hear the Indiana Jones theme in all its glory. And when the credits are rolling, you just sit back and realize that you just witnessed an epic adventure. And the stakes, everything about it, was just pure Hollywood amazingness. Oh man, every time I watch this movie, it's like I'm watching it for the very first time. It's everything you could ever want in an action movie. Now, this section here I'm very excited about. So I'm going all out here. I have found a good amount, right, of some trivia about this movie. And I'm very excited to talk about it, so let's get into it. So, the trivia about this film. So, first one. So, the famous scene of Indy shooting the swordsman. So, to give you context, there's a famous scene in this movie where, so when Indy and Marion are in Cairo, and this group of like fighters attack them, and then they end up kidnapping Marion, and Indy's trying to find her, and the crowd of people move away from him, and out comes this giant man wearing this giant like black robe, carrying this giant sword. He's like, hey, you want to fight? Then Indy's just like, I don't have time for this. He just pulls his gun out and shoots him. It's like, it's so like out of nowhere, oh dude, it's so hilarious. Like, guys like sitting there doing all the fancy swinging of the sword, and he just pulls out his revolver and shoots them. It's so good. It's amazing. And kind to find out, that whole sequence was not in the original script. Like, Indy was supposed to use his whip to get the sword out of the attacker's hands, but Harrison Ford and most of the crew got food poisoning because they were eating the food that was served at the place where they were shooting, and most of them got sick. And Harrison was too sick at the time, to perform the fight scene. And Harrison came up to Spielberg and he's like, can I just shoot him? And then Spielberg's like, yeah, let's try that. So they filmed the scene of Indy just shooting the swordsman. And it's now like one of the most like famous scenes like in the movie. And I like how in Temple of Doom, the scene's kind of parodied a little bit, where in Temple of Doom, Indy's like running to meet up with Willie and Short Round, and these two swordsmen jump out of the bushes ready to attack him. And Indy smirks. He goes to reach for his gun, but he realizes his gun holster is empty. And he's like, oh. So then he has to fist fight the guys and manages to steal one of the swords. But I thought it was kind of funny how Spielberg parried that scene in Temple of Doom. So yeah, the whole sequence of Indy shooting the guy was not in the original script. It was Harrison Ford's idea, and it ended up being one of the most famous scenes in the movie. And going back to the topic that I mentioned earlier about Ford and a good amount of the crew getting food poisoning, so they were filming the Cairo sequences in Tunisia, and nearly everyone in the cast and crew got sick except director Steven Spielberg. It was thought that he avoided illness by eating only the food he brought with him, a lot of cans of SpaghettiOs. That's pretty funny. So I feel like if you're going to a faraway place like this, I'd highly recommend taking your own food with you so you don't get sick. Like, I would definitely do that too if I knew I was traveling to like that area of the world. I think I would bring my own food with me because that's a big risk. I don't want to know what food poisoning is like. Ooh boy. From what I've heard, it's absolute hell on your body. Ugh. Food poisoning just sounds like the worst. So, another one is that, so during the fight sequence with the plane, one of the plane wheels actually drove over Harrison Ford's knee, tearing a ligament in his left leg. Luckily for him, the heat had turned the rubber tires soft, so it did not crush the bone. Rather than submit to Tunisian health care, Ford had his knee wrapped in ice, and he just carried on like it was nothing. Like, again, looking over these notes for the Indiana Jones movies, like, Ford got injured, many times filming the 3 films in the 80s. Like, he got hurt a lot, but what I like is how he reacted to him, like, in some circumstances, he just accepted the pain and just kept going. Just shows you how committed this man is to making the movie. So, as we continue with the trivia, when Marcus Brody first goes to Indy's house to discuss the mission of, Indy being tasked to recover the Ark from the Nazis, Indy is dressed wearing only like a robe. And he was dressed like this because in the original script, he was entertaining a young woman in his bedroom. The script originally planned to show her before moving to the next scene to give Indy more worldly persona like James Bond. However, her appearance was cut as Steven Spielberg thought that being a playboy did not fit Indy's character. This also helps explain why several of the co-eds fawn over Jones and why one girl wrote "I love you" on her eyelids. So that's talking about, so after it cuts to Indy taking off on the plane back at the beginning of the movie, we get a transition of Indy teaching at the university where he works at, because he's a teacher by day, archaeologist by night kind of thing. And what's pretty funny about this sequence is that every college female in every female student in his college class are all looking at him with the eyes of "I am madly in love with you" look. And one girl wrote "I love you" on her eyelids. And Indy notices that, and he's just kind of like, okay, But it's kind of funny still. But, so yeah, they decided to cut the whole playboy aspect of Indy's character because they didn't think it fit him. And I'm actually very happy they did that because I don't think that would have worked. I feel like they would have made him more unlikable if they'd kept that in there. So I think they definitely made the right call in cutting that. So, traditionally, when one of his films is about to open, George Lucas goes on vacation to get away from all the hype and anticipation of the film. And as Star Wars New Hope was getting ready to open back in 1977, Lucas went to Hawaii, where he was joined by Steven Spielberg when the grosses for Lucas's film came in, and it was clear it was going to be a hit. Lucas relaxed and was able to discuss other topics with his friend. It was at this point that Spielberg confessed he always wanted to direct a James Bond-ish film, to which Lucas replied he had a much better idea, an adventure movie called Raiders of the Lost Ark. The conversation happened while the two were making a sandcastle. How funny is that? After their trip, they got together and developed the script with Lawrence Kasdan. In 1999, Raiders of the Lost Ark was added to the National Film Registry by the United States Library of Congress. It is the only Indiana Jones film to have been inducted. Films are chosen for being critically, historically, and artistically significant. So, as I mentioned, when I was talking about how gory that sequence was of all those Nazis being killed by the spirits of the Ark, the spirit effects at the climax were achieved by shooting mannequins underwater in slow motion through a fuzzy lens to achieve an ethereal quality. And so you want to know how they made possibly one of the greatest and most famous sound effects in the Indiana Jones franchise, the punching sound effect. It's so over the top, but it works so well. The punching sound effect, it's ingrained in my memory for the rest of my life. Now you may ask, how did they achieve this amazing sound effect? Most of the body blow sounds were created by hitting a pile of leather jackets with a baseball bat. Like, how cool is that, you know? It's so awesome. So, the boulder sequence, here's a cool little fact. Harrison Ford actually outran the boulder in the opening sequence because the scene was shot twice from 5 different angles. He had to outrun it 10 times. Ford's stumble in the scene was deemed to look authentic and was left in. I always love that little situations where you have these little accidents show up during a take, but it makes the scene more authentic, so it's kept in. Another good example of this comes from the movie American Graffiti, which, funny enough, George Lucas directed. And the movie came out back in 1973, and it's about a group of high schoolers who just graduated from high school, and it's about all of them hanging out and having fun during a day in the early summer of 1962. It's a good movie. It's extremely good, and there's this really funny scene where one of the main guys doesn't have an ID to buy liquor because he's hanging out with this blonde girl. So he has to convince this guy to go into the liquor store and buy him some booze. And the guy just straight up robs the liquor store. He comes running out and throws the guy the bag. And apparently they shot the scene multiple times. And the actor playing the guy who didn't have the ID, he caught the bag perfectly on each go. But during one of the takes, he got distracted, and when the guy comes running out of the drugstore and throws in the bag, he almost drops it, but he still grabs it. And that was the take that George went with for the final cut of the film. And it's more authentic for some reason. It works extremely well, you know? So I always kind of like that, how these funny little accidents happen, and it makes the scene, you know, feel more real, so that's the take they go with. I kind of like that. It's pretty cool. So Indiana Jones's hat came from the famous Herbert Johnson hat shop in Savile Row, London. The hat was the shop's poet model. On the bonus features DVD, costume designer Deborah Nadelman said that in order to properly age the hat, she grabbed and twisted the hat, then she and Harrison Ford both sat on it and eventually made the hat look like a very lived-in and well-loved hat. And I think that was a pretty cool little detail by making sure the hat didn't look like Indy just bought it from the store, like the day before he went out on an adventure. Like, they had to make it look weathered, like he's been wearing it for a good amount of years. See, it's little things like that a lot of people may think might not be a big deal, but making something weathered and live and used for a long period of time is actually pretty important. Gives more history to it. Like, oh, this character has been using this a while, you know? Just more, you know, more little things that just make the movie that much better. So Spielberg has said that he considers it the most perfect film of the series. He never wanted to modify or change anything about it at all. So basically, we all know how back in 1997, George Lucas went back and like added in all these scenes for the original Star Wars trilogy. It was the Star Wars Special Edition, where he went back and added in a bunch of scenes that were either cut or stuff that he added in that he wasn't able to film at the time because technology wasn't good enough yet. So 20 years later, technology had improved, so he was able to add in some scenes that he couldn't do before. And I think a lot of the fans were very on the fence about, you know, these additional scenes and stuff that were added. A lot of people consider the original trilogy as a masterpiece, and they thought that George ruined them by adding in all these additional scenes that weren't needed. I mean, personally, I never had a problem with them, although the effects for the original special edition from 97 were horrendous, but they went back and redid them again for the 2011 Blu-ray release of the trilogy, and I own it. In the 2011 Blu-ray edition, those scenes were actually extremely well because technology had updated a lot, and the scenes actually look way better. But man, those CGI scenes from the 97 version were extremely bad. Especially the Jabba the Hutt scene with Han Solo. That first design of Jabba was so horrible. But anyway, you know, it's kind of become a meme of like, what if this director George Lucasified the movie? So, in Spielberg's case, this never happened to him with the Indiana Jones movies. They turned out perfectly. He never had to go back or change anything about them, and he didn't want to. So, Steven Spielberg said that he loved the melting head effect, calling it the most impressive effect he'd ever seen at the time. The effect proved to be so popular that special effects makeup artist Chris Wallace was flooded with calls, mostly from people that appreciate his work. He also got several calls from fellow special effects artists that were working on different films, asking him what was needed for the effect so they could incorporate a similar scene. And here is the last trivia one we'll cover. So during Indiana's escape from the natives in the beginning of the film, he has his pilot start the plane in the water. When the engine starts, it is the same sound that was used when the Millennium Falcon hyperdrive engine fails in the Star Wars movies. Every Indiana Jones film has a Star Wars reference. So Raiders was that plane sound effect, and also in Raiders, when Indy and Saw are in the Well of Souls, you can see on one of the walls there is a little like picture of like C-3PO and R2 on it, or they're like carved into like one of the walls. And then in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, the club that Indy and Willie escaped from was Club Obi-Wan. And in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when Indy and Donovan are having that meeting inside one of his rooms, when they're looking over one of the pieces of the marker, Donovan's wife walks into the room, and if you pay attention in the background, there's a party going on, and the band is playing a slowed down version of the Imperial March, which I thought that was pretty cool. I did not know this up until very recently. And then in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, during the final scene where the villain puts the skull back on that last skeleton, Indy says, "I have a bad feeling about this," which is a very famous quote in the Star Wars movies. And then, in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the Star Wars reference was that the Nazi plane that Indy is on, when they go through the opening of the storm to go back in time, we get this shot of the plane cockpit, and it's shaped just like the Millennium Falcon cockpit from Star Wars. So like I said, each movie has little, nods to Star Wars. So that wraps it up for the trivia about the movie and stuff like that. But now we're going to be getting into some more additional notes right quick about some more history about what led to the film being made and how Harrison Ford was cast to play Indy. So the idea for Indiana Jones, it goes all the way back to 1975, because during that year, Lucas discussed his serial film idea with his friend Philip Kaufman. The pair worked on a story for about 2 weeks. And Lucas had imagined his character as a college professor, an archaeologist, adventurer, based on his own appreciation for archaeology and for famous archaeologists like Roy Chapman Andrews and Leonard Woolley. Now, Lucas wanted Kaufman to direct the film, but because he was already committed to working on the western The Outlaw Josie Wales, which came out in 1976, Lucas paused the idea again and resumed working on Star Wars. In May 1977, Lucas vacationed in Hawaii to avoid any potential negative news about the theater debut of Star Wars. He invited Steven Spielberg to join him and his wife on a beach near the Monica Key Beach Hotel. Lucas and Spielberg discussed their next projects. Spielberg wanted to direct a James Bondish film, but Lucas pitched him The Adventures of Indiana Smith. Lucas still hoped Kaufman would direct it, but a few months later it was clear he could not participate, and Lucas asked Spielberg to replace him. Now, Spielberg hated the name Indiana Smith, believing it would remind audiences of the Steve McQueen character Nevada Smith. So Spielberg and Lucas agreed to use Jones instead. Actors Clint Eastwood and Toshiro Thomone and the James Bond character were the basis of Jones's own. Lucas wanted Jones to be a kung fu practitioner and a playboy, funding his lifestyle with the spoils of his adventures, but Spielberg felt the character was complicated enough being an adventurer and an archaeologist. So Lucas wanted to fund Raiders of the Lost Ark himself, but lacked the money. Lucasfilm offered the project to several Hollywood studios, but they rejected it. In part because of the proposed $20 million budget, but also because of the deal Lucas offered. He wanted the studio to provide the budget, have no creative input, and allow him to retain control of the licensing rights and any sequels. The studios considered this deal unacceptable, but Paramount Pictures president Michael Eisner compromised with Lucas, accepting his deal in exchange for exclusive rights to any sequels and several penalties of extending the schedule or budget. Lucas reportedly negotiated a salary between $1 million and $4 million plus a share of the gross profits, though a separate report stated he received only net profits. Spielberg received up to $1.5 million as director and a share of the gross profits. So the next note we're going to get into here is how Ford was cast to play Indiana Jones. So Lucas at the time wanted a relatively unknown actor willing to commit to a trilogy of films to play Indiana Jones. Many names were brought up on who could play the character. Those considered for the role included Bill Murray, Nick Nolte, Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, Tim Matheson, Nick Mancuso, Peter Coyote, Jack Nicholson, Jeff Bridges, John Shea, Sam Elliott, and Harry Hamlin. Casting director Mike Fenton favored Bridges, but Lucas's wife and frequent collaborator Marika Lucas preferred Tom Selleck. Selleck was contractually obligated to filming the television series Magnum P.I. if it were to be made into a full series. Lucas and Spielberg asked the show's studio, CBS, to release him 10 days early for his contract. Realizing Selleck was in demand, CBS greenlit Magnum P.I., forcing him to drop out and leaving the production with no lead actor only weeks before filming. The 1980 actors' strike later put the show on hiatus for 3 months, which would have allowed Selleck to star as Jones. Steven Spielberg said Harrison Ford was perfect for the role after seeing him in the Star Wars sequel, The Empire Strikes Back. Kansayajian said Ford had always been considered but not cast because he was already a well-known actor. Lucas was concerned about seeming reliant on Ford by casting him in another film after Star Wars, and he also did not think he would commit to 3 films. However, Ford thought it would be a fun project and agreed to the deal. He negotiated a 7-figure salary, a percentage of the gross profits, and the option to rewrite his dialogue. Ford's interpretation of the character was an academic first and an adventurer second. John Williams composed the score for Raiders of the Lost Ark. He said the music did not have to be serious for the film and was instead theatrical and excessive. Williams spent a few weeks working on the Indiana Jones theme, more commonly known as the Raiders March, that plays during the main character's heroic scenes. 2 separate pieces were played for Spielberg, who wanted to use both. These pieces became the main theme and musical bridge of the Raiders March. For the romantic theme, Williams took inspiration from older films like the drama Now Voyager from 1942 to create something more emotionally monumental that he felt would contrast well with the film's humor and lighter moments. Williams used dark orchestral pieces to represent the actions of the Nazis, using the 7th degree on the scale of the bottom. He said this signified a more militaristic evil to create something suitable biblical for the Ark of the Covenant. He used a mix of chorus and orchestra. Now this next note I have here goes into how they created the death scene for our 3 main villains at the end of the movie when they opened the Ark of the Covenant. So, how did they make this horrific scene of our 3 villains meeting their demise? So the first one we're going to talk about is how the one Nazi's head shrinks. So, a mold was made of the actor's face. It was lined with bladders filled with air, controlled by up to 10 people. The air was removed to make the head shrivel, and that was how they were able to capture his head shrinking the way it did. Now, the Nazi, whose face literally melts on screen, special effects artist Chris Wallace sculpted the actor's melting face using different colored layers of something called gelatin placed over a carved heat-resistant stone skull. Propane heaters were used to melt the gelatin and filmed using a slower than normal camera, so the effect appears to take place rapidly when played at normal speed. Now we get to the last death, Belloc's, which you all know his head explodes. So Belloc's head mold contained a thin plaster skull filled with blood bags and detritus. It was blown up using explosives, shotguns, and an air cannon. It took 3 attempts to get the desired effect. Belloc's death was considered so extreme, the Motion Picture Association of America initially classified the film with an R rating, restricting it to those over the age of 17 without an adult. Flames were superimposed over the scene to conceal the effect. So I just can't believe it that that scene is already horrific enough, and knowing that the scene was 10 times worse. So it almost got an R rating, but they managed to tiptoe out of it by using fire to conceal how bloody and violent the scene really is. Even with the fire effects, man, that scene is still horrific to watch. I still believe 100% if this movie came out today, it would get the R rating. I'm very convinced. So originally, there was scripted, detailed montages during the transition between locations, but Spielberg saved money by showing a map and an animated line traveling between destinations. Now, can you imagine if that little effect hadn't made its way into the movie? Like, dude, the moments, like the scenes where we see Indy, in the plane, then we see the red line going across a map, showing you where on the planet Indy is going to. That scene is so iconic. It makes an appearance in all 5 films. And dude, it is such an amazing little detail. And I remember it most from playing the Lego Indiana Jones, the original adventures on the Wii when I was a little kid. Like, when you booted the game up, like each mission, when it was loading up, you would see the red line going across the map to show you where you were. It's such a brilliant little effect. Like, can you imagine if it hadn't made it into the movie? Like, it's one of my favorite things about it. Like, it's such a beautiful effect that I'm so happy that Spielberg came up with it. So, Raiders of the Lost Ark was released to general critical acclaim. The National Board of Review and critic Vincent Canby listed it as one of the 10 best films of that year. Canby labeled the film an instant classic and one of the most humorous and stylish American films ever made. He described it as having refined the old serial films into their most perfect form for a modern audience. Roger Ebert called it a series of breathless and incredible adventures inspired by and celebrating childhood stories told in comic books and movies. He concluded the film was successful in its singular goal of entertaining, creating an adventure epic in the vein of Star Wars, the James Bond films, and Superman. Raiders of the Lost Ark has had a lasting impact on popular culture. It is considered a touchstone of modern cinema, creating a film framework still emulated by other films. Spielberg has said he considers it the most perfect film of the series because he never wanted to change anything about it. It's perfect just the way it is. So Ford's performance led to his casting in the 1982 science fiction cult classic film called Blade Runner, as I mentioned earlier. But despite new openings for Karen Allen, she expressed disappointment with the film because her character was motivated more by her relationship with Jones and financial gain than with her father and his obsession with the Ark. She unsuccessfully lobbied for rewrites to address this and explore her character further. Even so, Allen affirmed that many women and girls had appreciated and been inspired by her character. So, Raiders of the Lost Ark led to an increase in studies and students studying archaeology, and many modern archaeologists have cited the film as their inspiration. Rhys Davies said he had met over 150 lecturers, professors, and archaeologists who told them their interest in the field began with the film. The original Indiana Jones costume, hat, and jacket were stored indiscriminately after filming at Lucas's Skywalker Ranch until 2012. Nadoolman Landis recovered the items to be exhibited as part of a Hollywood costume display at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. So that is going to wrap up all the history and trivia about Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. And one last talking point I wanted to talk about right quick is that now that we have the 5 main Indiana Jones films, now my question is, where do you think Indiana Jones should go from here? In my personal opinion, I do feel like that we don't need any more movies, and obviously, I don't think that the character should be recast in any kind of way. Like Harrison Ford has stated that this is his character. When Harrison Ford passes away, the character goes with him. It's that easy. That was his exact quote. And I believe he's right. Like, Harrison Ford was born to play this character. No one else can play him but him. Just like with Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, or Daniel Radcliffe playing Harry Potter. Like, these are their roles. No one else can play them. And I personally don't think we need any more films, but we do have another Indiana Jones project on the way in the form of a video game. We have Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Now, a lot of gameplay has come out, and we have 2 different trailers, and it looks like the game is really trying to recapture the magic of the original Indiana Jones trilogy. So, it is an upcoming action-adventure game developed by Machine Games, and it's based on the Indiana Jones franchise and will feature an original narrative that draws from the film series. Now, this game is set between the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So, Raiders of the Lost Ark takes place in 1936, and Last Crusade takes place in 1938. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is set to happen in 1937. And if you look at the trailers for this game, like, it really looks like it's recapturing Raiders and Last Crusade extremely well. And Troy Baker is voicing Indy for this game. And his Harrison Ford take on the voice is really good. Like, he sounds just like Harrison Ford from the trailers. Like, he's got, like, Harrison Ford's like, tone of voice down very well. But I do think the future of the Indiana Jones story, I think video games are the answer. Like, The Great Circle is looking very promising. I am a little disappointed that the game is going to be in first person. I've seen dozens and dozens of comments from people saying that they wish that the game was third person, like the Uncharted video games. But nonetheless, it's looking like it's going to be one heck of a game, and I think that the franchise should continue, maybe in like comic book form or in video games. I think that would be the best approach. But when it comes to movies, I think Dial of Destiny should be the last one. Like, we don't need any more movies or spin-offs or anything like that at all. But that is going to wrap up talking about the Indiana Jones movies. I hope you enjoyed this recording. I had an absolute blast getting to talk about these films and just getting to go into why I enjoy these films so much. It was my honor to discuss these with you all. I hope you enjoyed this recording. And I just want to personally thank you for your amazing support. And I hope you learned something pretty cool about Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. So, until next time, my name is Christian Taylor, and you are listening to the Tales of Music and Film.